Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome to our episode of the Fintech Garden. And today I'm really pleased to introduce to Jeremy Takle. He's right now, and let me help me with the LinkedIn maybe to properly put it. So he's CEO at VEMI and the chairman of the VEMI. And also he's a co-founder of the Pennyworth. And he has really great experience in digital banking because he used to work for Barclay and he did the digital banking in the United States. So I'm really pleased. Please welcome Jeremy. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So today we would like to learn what you're up to. And the topic for our discussion is going to be T-shaped experts. So let's start small. What are happening on your side?
Yeah, well, right now, as you said, I'm with VEMI, which is a digital bank that is trying to be a global ethical Sharia banking model,
Mhm.
really trying to address the massive gap there is between good Sharia banking, i.e. the good value, great experience, and then the preference there is in the Muslim world for Sharia banking. What actually happens is that most Muslims choose a mainstream banking option because there isn't a good Sharia compliant one. But technology, we believe, can actually change that. And so we've built a platform, which is a global platform starting here in the UK and then rolling it out across large, high growth, predominantly Muslim markets. And so Saudi, Indonesia, but starting with the UK bank license. So what's really occupying us is, of course, that we've gone through this rigorous process of getting a UK license, a bank license, both to actually run banking here in the UK, but also as a bank holding company
Mhm.
to invest in other banks. And that's a key differentiator because not many businesses like ours has the ability to quickly go into other markets and set up bank licenses in each market. To do that, obviously, we're raising capital. That's the sort of one constraint to build banks is you need to have minimum capital in each instance. And really, since Silicon Valley Bank crashed, a few years ago, there's been very little new startup capital going into banking. Been a lot of growth models there, but there haven't been a lot of early stage banks, at least in the UK, going through authorization. There's a few going on in places like Saudi where there's a lot of investment going on. So our focus, as you can imagine, is getting that bank license mobilized by raising for the next phase of that growth. We are lucky in the sense that we've got good founding investors. It's a largely Saudi and UK founded company. And so some of that capital is obviously coming from existing investors, some of it from new investors that they are familiar with. Our cornerstone investors have a large footprint of other investors that are
Mhm.
interested to come along, and we're trying to work with a number of strategic investors, so other larger banks, particularly in those types of jurisdictions, GCC and Southeast Asia, to raise for
Mhm.
this next part. But that's sort of what's occupying me the most.
Mhm.
And as you probably know, that can take over the amount, the full-time job of a CEO for a lot of it. But we're also at the same time building and deploying the platform.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of activity. Luckily, we've got a great team we've pulled together here in the UK to start doing that and to put the infrastructure in place. And we're lucky because we're at the beginning of a new period, I think, a sort of third generation of digital banking. There was obviously, we say third generation because there was obviously sort of web-based banking, and then there was the mobile native.
Yeah.
There's clearly an advantage to building now data up
Yeah.
based on AI native
Platforms,
mindset.
basically.
Exactly. And so the speed with which we're deploying, whether it's infrastructure, app build, whether it's even just going through and building all of our processes and procedures and documentation, it's just happening at a much faster speed, much more productive, but it requires still very senior individuals who know
Yeah.
they need to be good prompt engineers, and they need to know what the specifications are, and they need to how to review it. So we're learning as we're going. How do we move from the last model to the new model?
Mhm.
So that's also obviously trying to carve out time on that. And then, as you mentioned, I'm also the co-founder of Pennyworth, which is
Yeah.
a wealth tech, and we've been in parallel doing a lot of development on there, particularly around building the next iteration of wealth management in app-based wealth management.
Mhm.
And again, embedding what we had before, which was an automated money management
Mhm.
algorithms, embedding AI systems, multi-agent AI systems into that. And now you can really start envisaging what the next generation of wealth management products basically are going to look like, a private banker in your pocket. So that's a sort of, that's my side activity alongside the main job of trying to get VEMI into this next phase.
There is a lot of to pick up from this discussion, I think, but like we will try to stick to our topic, T-shaped experts, because I think that's something that you need in different business models, and especially like you mentioned, experts who've been there, done that. I'm really into the Harvard Business School overview of like service models, and one of them is gray hair. Like you've been there, done that, you know exactly. Even if you didn't execute the particular thing, you have an experience doing something in this area or in another region, and that overlaps maybe with your building in UK and then extend into other regions. And the topic is T-shaped experts. So let's define it for our listeners, like what exactly it means.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably an academic definition of it because it's a well-trodden area, but I think there's something very specific that it means in fintech or in banking. The more academic is that you've just got individuals that have, whilst they have deep expertise,
Yeah.
have the ability to interact across other silos. That's a model that I think describes a business and a organizational model that used to exist in banking and elsewhere, i.e. siloed models.
Yeah.
And I know that big banks like Barclays, Citibank, etc., used to really focus on this idea of T-shape because they knew they had siloed individuals, but could they collaborate across the silos?
Yeah.
Which really was a hard thing to do, because if you need to bring lots of different resources together, you really needed to be very strong at the collaboration bit because you had no decision rights over those other silos. I think in the modern building of fintechs, and particularly fintech banks, it's come to mean something different, and which is not just that you have deep expertise. Everyone comes at their career, I think, from some level of subject matter expertise, something they've gone deep in for a while, and then they come, even if they come to general management, product management, they then come out with, they're either a designer, an engineer, or a banker, or whatever. But the ability to actually not only interact with other functions, but actually work directly with them in an interdisciplinary way, not just multidisciplinary, but interdisciplinary. This used to sort of be true always in banking. I mean, my career at Barclays was 25 years of slightly unusually building banks. And so I was typically put into a new jurisdiction as employee number 1 or 2, with a lot of capital, mind you, from Barclays and a brand, obviously, but we would build a business from there. And we would put together a team to build the bank. And the team would, by definition, need to be interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary. And you needed to work in quite an interdisciplinary way. So that meant that even as the head of that business, you would need to know enough about regulation and compliance. You need to know enough about credit. You need to know enough about marketing and enough about, the branch infrastructure. And loosely, how did the business model work? You need to do enough to be able to actually build those businesses. So that was sort of always true.
Yeah.
And particularly understanding credit and balance sheet management or treasury. Those were the sort of 2 cornerstones. Outside of just understanding the banking products, you need to understand those 2 elements. What's changed, and I went through this personally as a sort of journey, was the realization that as banking became less siloed, or you could start to imagine banks as being less siloed, i.e. they could be built by the same team, essentially with all the infrastructure, no longer in data centers run over here, but actually operated in the cloud, and no longer distributed through branches which were over there, but actually distributed via an app which you could directly interact with the customer through. It meant that single product teams could basically run a business end to end. And then you needed product managers or bankers, let's say, that actually could understand and work with and understood some of the disciplines of design, development, product development, product design, engineering to some degree, right? So you're working with a very different set of silos, as well as credit and marketing and all the other subjects that were necessary.
Still didn't go anywhere.
Yeah. And what was interesting is I sort of was building the digital bank in the US and running the digital bank that we launched there. Doing so in a traditionally siloed infrastructure and organization was very hard. You definitely needed those that big top line of pulling together different strands, because none of these guys reported to you, yet you were accountable for all of the P&L and all of the outcomes. And realize that's slow. It's very clunky. It's very difficult to get things going fast. And that wasn't just at Barclays. You can see the entire bank market is littered with the sort of corpses of these startup banks that they've tried to create inside big banks that have just died on the way. Whether it's Chase with what they try to do in the US, or it's Bo from NatWest here in the UK. There's just a litany of these all over the place. What I realized quickly is that others were building banks outside of the large organizations very quickly and rapidly. And so if I needed to learn these new skills, I needed to go back to the floor and learn them. And actually, I couldn't do that in somewhere like Barclays. And so I left in 2019 to then go and figure out what this was about and how I would learn it. And my greatest sort of learning period was probably, I spent a year with Klarna, helping them launch their banking products into Germany and Sweden at that point. So pure, deposits and true banking products, not just their buy now, pay later. So, and working in an agile product team that was spun up for that purpose. And looking at an organization at that time, we're about 5,000 employees organized into 500 10-man teams. And if they wanted to enter a new product or a new country or any other dimension, they could just spin up a team, and the team had the core DNA to go and then build. So that was an amazing journey for me, and it was going back to the floor and really starting to learn. Okay, so how do you actually work with the engineers and the designers to make that happen? I knew enough about banking to know what the model needed to look like, but it hadn't really had to be tested on those skills previously. And then that led then to doing it ourselves with Pennyworth and now with VEMI. So I think it means something different, as I say, between what it historically had meant, which is operating across the silos, to now saying, no, it's actually the skill you need. Every squad, every team needs to consist of people that are T-shaped in the sense that they're coming with their expertise, be it compliance, credit, design, delivery, development rather. But they also need to know enough about each other's disciplines to work together. And particularly the product manager or the business manager needs to understand that more so than any other.
So in this case, maybe to sum up, or maybe to have an example, like, okay, we will come back maybe to historical, what T-shaped meant, but the question is, can you show or describe an example of T-shaped expert in a squad or the team which is spinning up, like who it is? Is it the product manager? Is it someone from C-level, or who is accountable for the results? Like maybe as a position profile or the title, who is potentially this person who should be T-shaped in this construction?
I would argue that everybody needs to be, in the new organizations, need to be T-shaped to some degree. Clearly the general managers, and a part of that is about the evolution. So if you're in a startup, then your first squad is essentially your founders and their enlarged management team. And they're the first that are essentially operating. We've essentially codified this because if you take our model and then start redeploying in each market, essentially you're building a new version of our platform in every market.
Blueprint, basically.
Blueprint in every market. And we essentially have a model for how we scale that up. So there's squad number one, which is essentially the person responsible for the country. That could be someone you're putting on assignment initially, but it's typically the CEO that you've decided you're going to put into country. And then the core team around them, mostly focused initially on the first problem, which is get a license. And then the squads then expand. They're like cells dividing into to a wider group that allow you then to start doing the discovery and the build and ultimately the launch of the business. So it means then that you need that first team, which ultimately perhaps becomes your executive team, to be at least that way. And then, of course, the more your squads become specialized squads, they're just working on a specific product. But even within that's why I'm saying everybody, to some degree, you need to have people that can be like that. Having completely standalone engineers or designers that really cannot collaborate or at least know enough around each other's subjects. Now, there probably isn't anybody that really is just completely standalone, but some like to work sometimes like that. And so it's not something you need to necessarily hire for. You can train it. It's very easy to train for. Putting a squad together and then having them problem solve together and giving them then the routines and the experience of doing that together and being curious about each other's domains in order to get to the most interesting hypothesis and solution means that actually they'll learn to do it whilst they're doing it. And as long as you emphasize that that's what you're you're aiming for, that's what you're going to reward, not just a great individual discipline answer to that question, but actually one that reflects the creativity that's established by having an interdisciplinary team. If you say, well, that's what I'm rewarding for, then of course you then can drive that sort of behavior.
That's a really hot topic because I would say motivation sometimes, like socially accepted people will say, okay, yeah, I will want to become the T-shaped expert, but coming maybe from my background from the technical team, sometimes people can say, okay, I have a functionality, I can do the tech stuff, but whatever is beyond the tech, not really my pie. And you mentioned that it's easy to learn. Like, have you got an examples like we've done that, and what were the motivation and how you approach the motivation? Because it's really easy to want to have it,
Yeah.
but how to execute it, I think it's particularly interesting for everyone. Like, what is your go-to plan, how to have it done?
My examples, and I have them both at well, I have them, I think, also from Klarna to some degree, but it's usually the opposite way around to what the way you would expect it to be. There you had a lot of tech product savvy and design savvy individuals, but they lacked a lot of the experience in banking,
Exactly.
the understanding of credit, treasury, and just the product dynamics and pricing and so forth, to understand how would you actually build a bank, given that you can actually build the actual business around it. At Klarna, my job was to some degree to start to bring in that expertise and say, well, why are you building this product? What's it for? How does it work? And being willing to embrace those disciplines in doing so, because otherwise you end up, in my mind, with a lot of the models that we've seen, which is great experience, lots of exciting things going on in some of the neobanks that have started up, but completely the wrong product to the wrong audience, which actually drives no revenue and is a very difficult, and they're all then pivoting away from that model from day one. It's because you didn't start with any domain expertise about what's the real problem that needs to be solved and that generates some sort of value add that you can sustain. And so Klarna had a very good lending model. It wasn't that they didn't understand that business model, but as they were exploring other domains within banking, they needed to bring that in. So that was a very specific. As we founded both Pennyworth and VEMI, we really had this issue directly, and it was in the sort of first squads that we were setting up, the sort of first founding squads, that we needed to hire bankers because they needed to go through an authorization process. They needed, a CEO, a CTO, a CFO minimum. And those could then sort of essentially be the product manager, the financial manager, and the first engineer. But they were so used to working in silos and so used to only one type of model, you needed to reschool straight away. The easiest thing is you solve a problem together. The first problem was obviously, how do we get bank authorization, and how do we actually then pitch our business model and create a regulatory business plan and all the technical documents that you need to submit, and learning to problem solve together, work in decision action cycles, and learn that this is the model you're going to then try to replicate when you go to the next team, which is going to build the first product, let's say. I think that, for me, and that was both in Pennyworth and in VEMI, that we've had to go through that evolution of, there is a very few people that have gone through this end-to-end inside banks. And even many of the banks that have been built, many of the new challenger banks that have been built perhaps in the older model rather than as a sort of tech-led model, or they've been built as a tech model, but without much banking experience inside them. So there's very few, and I call them actually hybrids of banking and tech product management. And the new T-shaped people need to be those hybrids. And I think the way to do it is organically, and embed everybody in a squad, have them solve a problem together, have them learn the new skill by experience, and then of course overlay that with some selection of if you can find the individuals that have already gone through that, fantastic. Our CTO at VEMI was involved in setting up Starling, and then went on to build a crypto business. So whilst is a traditional tech person from big banks, worked at Barclays, worked at NatWest, etc., has learnt that skill. So you could hire for it, but you might also need to then train for it as well at the same time.
Okay, to sum up, in this case, I think the best way to spin up the team like that is to give a real challenge or the real task, and taking the blueprint of the banking platform and spinning it in the specific country actually shows the results. So it can be one of the KPI.
Yes.
And I think it's essential, because if we're doing something for months or years and there is no KPI, it would be hard to estimate the outcome of the team. So we need to give a real task with accountable output.
Yeah.
So that's kind of getting the license, spinning something in the specific country. And from what I can hear, one of the potential approach is to start with the T, like as a banking experience, and then go deep with the subject matter. And I think the person potentially is coming, I don't know, from accounting, from financial side, or from the tech side, or from the digital product side, and then growing the expertise and into collaboration for getting the things done on the specific region. I think it's a really great approach, because going into the battle proves that the team is possible, has the capability to execute. It's really nice. And I'm always trying to compare, like, you to see two different objects and try to see and reflect what is the difference. And we've talked about specialists and generalists. Like, usually, I would say in development and software development or product development, you kind of have people who are specialists.
Yeah.
They are accountable or responsible in the first place for executing something which is really specialist, like as a platform, as an infrastructure, as a code, I don't know, QA, whatever. And then you have managers who are generalists. They are accountable for the outcome. And it overlaps with the T-shaped experts.
Yeah.
But if we take a look like this old way, the structures and basically managers, one of the really great book of Peter Drucker defining the word manager, how do you compare this managers and specialists different from T-shaped experts?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And let me just pick up something you said there to sort of try to answer it, because I think that the alternative, what I'm suggesting, you might say, well, what alternative is there? You have a problem to solve as a business. Well, we've seen what the alternative is, which is that you put together a management team that work in the old siloed way, and then you hire some engineers and designers and some product managers to actually build the business. But they're actually running in two different organizational structures or two different cultures. And that clash is very, very difficult. We are always saying, I think, is you're trying to take probably the banker that typically has the most accountability for actually driving a business cross-functionally is typically the sort of product manager or the commercial manager who owns the product and the P&L and the decision rights around that. And whereas they're used to working in their silo, put them together with the CTO or the who actually, they never typically talk to each other because there's usually some sort of digital design people between them, but put them together, and then of course finance / regulatory responsibilities, and those are sort of the core teams that you put together, and those, having them solve the first steps of the business design, the regulatory application, etc., I think is the right way to do it. But I do believe that yes, the general manager, if there is such a sort of standalone defined thing, is the right way to think about it. As they are the ones that first and foremost need to be T-shaped, that's because that whole idea of general management is that you may have come out of engineering or product, but you had to learn to be a general manager, and therefore you had to do that across a number of different functions. Typically in large organizations, that doesn't happen until you get to the top of the hierarchy, because that's the point at which the silo doesn't exist anymore. And so that was the sort of first responsibility. What I'm arguing is that actually in the modern scale agile models, everybody has to be T-shaped. Everybody is not a general manager as such, because they're not necessarily in the product management stream, which is probably the most equivalent, all the way up to the executive of the business and all the way down. But they are the most T-shaped, if you will. They have to be, because they're bringing in all the other disciplines. The other disciplines just need to get on a little bit with each other and understand each other. But design and development often go hand in hand over here, whereas a credit and marketing will go hand in hand over there. But they need to build and design it together, but they're not working in the same little decision action cycle. One is running in a build cycle, the other one's running in a run cycle. And so they can be slightly further afield or further apart as individual disciplines. But in my mind, I can draw the line between Peter Drucker and this. The squads are set up; they're essentially running management by objectives. That's a Drucker term, right? Management by objectives, obviously, then interpreted by Gove as OKRs, and then implemented as OKRs. But that's essentially this idea that you look at outcomes of problems that you're trying to solve, KRs being the sort of way you think you're going to solve them.
Plan.
And that's how essentially the squad operates. And that's essentially the management methodology. And so I do think there are probably many texts in the management library that you would probably just throw out now because it's, it's had its time and it really relates to very large, multinational M-shaped hierarchies that isn't relevant. But the likes of Drucker, insights around what real management is about, leadership, but management particularly. How do you get things done
And moving quickly.
and moving quickly? And that I think you can draw the line directly from there to what's going on in most new scale ups today.
Okay, and makes sense. Another thing which I think affecting why we have this shift is the frequency of getting the things done and pushed to the market. Because if we tend to think about the existing or even pre-internet banking, it's planned ahead for years. You have the budget, you have the silo, you have the business model defined. There is no other companies popping up like, I don't know, as nowadays. You basically see the competition field for years ahead, and the planning is years ahead. And do you think that how right now the market is shifting? Because fairly, mobile devices has been there on the market for 15 years. If we're talking about like smartphones, iOS or iPhone, like we had some kind of communicators, but it wasn't significant share of the market. Do you think that the pace right now with the technology, especially with AI, is shifting the need, which is then shifting the teams and how they structured and how they need to build their soft skills and hard skills?
Yeah, it's a really interesting change that's happened, particularly in banking, which is that up until the digital revolution, arguably banks were very physical, and therefore they operated well in silos. Every country was its own domestic market. As I said, back end was big data centers, front end was distributed branches. Someone sat in the middle and made some credit and treasury decisions, but that was essentially it. And it required really a traditional hierarchical model to run it. And the bigger it was, the more that was complex, but had to be done that way. And then as the business model of banking fundamentally changed into something where tech is essentially the product now.
Yeah.
And as I said, the same team can run the back end to front, end to end under a license. That whole model needed to change, and it needed to change across a number of dimensions. And you said how you can iterate fast. I think there are 3 or 4 dimensions of this model. Call it scaling agile that we're talking about. One is having autonomous teams that can operate and problem solve. That's sort of the first principle of that, I would say. And that's where the T-shaped bit comes in, right? You need really strong T-shaped individuals to be able to play inside that, and the ability then to have those operate and problem solve. 2, though, is if you're going to do this well, you need then to have the alignment across all of that.
Yeah.
That's where the OKRs and the mission-driven alignment happens, right? And then now we're back to Drucker, and this is how you manage these things. And that means you drive each of those autonomous teams as you spin them up through your absolute missions. They manage their performance back with OKRs. So that's the second dimension you need to have. And the third is they need to run in some form of decision action cycle, some sort of test and learn. Right. Whether that's a build cycle where you discover, design, build, and then, get a feedback from, and then you do more design work and discovery work, or it's performance, right? So you look at your statistics and then you decide, okay, I need to try some new hypothesis, new marketing hypothesis, let's say, you implement, then you read them back, or whether it's just risk, whether you're sort of constantly monitoring, assessing, controlling, and then, continuing to monitor. So they're all working in decision action cycles through that. So the reason it moves so much faster than other banks isn't the fact that they are agile and that you've got a strong alignment model that allows them to be autonomous. It's the fact they're constantly learning. They're constantly problem solving in their model. And I think that's just inherent in the model of tech development in a way. But and it's sort of inherent in the way that, let's say, credit cards went to market when they built when the first new monoline credit cards went to market. So we've seen it in pockets of build and run. What we've not seen is in one coherent model, and that's what I think you're seeing with the new banks that are coming to market. And then you said one last thing, which is AI. What that's doing, of course, is just accelerating that model and making it more productive. We try to think hard about how is the fact that we can now spin up everything much faster with commercially available AI, frankly,
Yeah.
and build apps much faster, build variations of the infrastructure much faster. Does that change the way we're organizing the model? No. What it does is it sort of obviously means you need less people to do it with. You need more senior experienced
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
who know how to actually set the specification and know how to QA very, very well.
Yeah.
That role has become more and more important. But you're getting the productivity improvements from doing so. And what we're learning, of course, is the productivity improvement is happening at an individual level, not so much at team learning level.
Mm-hmm.
So how does the team problem solve? What's the role of the team in doing the creative problem solving bit, but not necessarily the labor bit that the new productivity tools of AI are giving
Mm-hmm.
us?
Actually, you highlighted AI and productivity, and it reminds me Goldratt, the Goal, the book, and he's showing really great example by shifting the blueprinting or like designing something from the old school with the paper and I don't know, you name it, and then into the digital products. Like, first, computers used to create the blueprints for I don't know, different factories or something like that.
Yeah.
And is it AI kind of the same that? We have the barrier for being more productive not because of the tool but how we digesting this tool as a team or as individuals.
Yes. Yeah, I think that, any constraint that you've had historically has obviously been in an information environment has been it's been the processing power of the human to some degree.
Yeah.
And so that's always been the constraint that we've been trying to work with. And just, as we know, data-led decisions don't mean just having more data. It actually means trying to figure out how to choose the data that you can make decisions with. As we've gone through cycles of better digital enhancement of our labor, so productivity improvements, we've had to think a lot about what is the role of the human, what's the problem solving or the creative problem asking problem
Yeah.
that humans,
Yeah.
particularly teams of humans, can do. And this, I mean, by the way, links very neatly into the tea. If you just have a bunch of individuals who only have the stalk of the tea
Yeah.
and not the hat, that they're not going to be the best interdisciplinary problem solvers or problem identifiers. I mean, it is a process of diagnosis and then potential remedying, but what you've got now is that you can test things much faster, you can implement things much faster, you can even create ideas much faster, because if you just got the cornerstones of what's the question of the idea,
Yeah.
you can then generate lots of idea because you can just pull in the universe of all that has been written historically to try to solve that idea.
Ideation and analysis become much cheaper, I would say,
Yes,
because
much cheaper.
and that's why I'm bringing this question about new tools. By being D-shaped and having some kind of subject matter expertise and there's understanding of the business end to end, because technology changed how we're using the tools.
Yeah.
Like you don't need to go to the branch to open an account or initiate the payment or get an update of your accounts. So in this case, I think having the tools which are giving the possibility to ask a lot of questions on the better frequency that it used to be with the experts, because you might face the situation when you have agile sprint and then you are interacting with the product owner, I don't know, on by day or 2 days schedule, and then you're asking questions, you're iterating. But by having tools as AI and being T-shaped expert, you can run 1,000 questions in one day and come up with a better solution or better product without even interacting, because you have this ability to understand the product that you're building. So I think that becomes is really important skill for any kind of person in the industry, because you need to understand a lot of not just from the banking and accounting side, because okay, the product is there,
Yeah.
the models that we have, they defined, we're coming up with the new models, but still it's moving relatively slow. Then we have a technology which is okay, it's also evolving, but it's faster maybe as a business models, as a financial products, but still relatively small. And what I think the biggest combat or biggest quest right now, how we solving the questions in the business models using the technology, but then how we're approaching clients and making the tools or platforms or business models more usable for them.
Yeah.
So, and that comes all together with the T-shaped expertise, because you need to understand what we're solving, in which way, and what tools available for us.
Yeah. You triggered a thought, because I do think it's worth just reiterating at least my view on what we're talking about with AI, I think, definitely there's obviously the underlying models and there's a lot to be said about the product is the model. There's a lot to be said about that. But of course, it's the application I think that's very interesting, and that's where we're going to see the huge economic benefits across all industries, not just banking. The fact that we did have, and this is why we conceptualize it as the web, then the mobile, then the AI, because the AI we do think of as the next platform, if you will. It's not a form factor, but it's the way we can think about every dimension of the business now being different.
Yeah.
The initial dimensions are quite simple. It's now online versus offline. It's bits versus atoms. That's quite straightforward. When it became a mobile app, the ability there are only business models that could exist once it became mobile, right?
Yeah.
And inside and outside of banking, you could only then get to that mobility. There's only models now that will exist because it's AI, but we just don't know what they are. So what are the sort of dimensions that we can improve? The first one, the one we're all perhaps leaning into, is the productivity improvement, the ability to improve an individual. And I think more excitingly, how do you improve a team through it? And that's a little bit about how the individuals relate, but also then what problems do you leave for the team to solve?
Mm-hmm.
What's the most productive thing the team now can do, given that they don't need to then just don't need to do many of the things that the AI can help you with. Then there's the next dimension, which I think we're seeing a little bit of, but not a lot of yet in banking, which is embedding AI as the product.
Yeah.
I mean, apart from a little bit of sort of chat in customer services, apart from back-end things like helping with fraud analysis and reducing those problems, we're not yet seeing a lot of AI directly in the product. That's one of the things we're excited about with Pennyworth, which is that we're embedding a lot of the AI in the product itself, so that ultimately we are replicating what used to only be possible for humans to do, but at a fraction of the cost, which means you can roll it out to everybody. And I think for us, that's private banking, but it could have also be private tuition, personal shopping, you name it. Anything could be done.
Agent shopping.
Yes, exactly. It's going to all be done for you. But in the past, it was so expensive because only humans could do it, so they could only afford to do it for the people that could afford it. I think the next iteration, or the next step on that, so there's productivity, there's product. The next step of it, we can't almost see that it's going to fundamentally change the way, in the same way that, I mean, this is a non-banking example, that Uber could only exist in mobile, right? Because, you couldn't have it when it was all desktop, right? It can only exist because both the customer and the provider, the vehicle,
capability,
and the capability to align them all, and the mapping and everything could sit together in an app. Well, what's now available from AI, that's the thing that I'm really excited by, the thing that couldn't possibly have been done in a business model before.
So new scales, basically.
Yeah.
Where, I don't know, with the Space Speed 1, we reached the orbit, but right now we can go further and explore much more exciting things. So maybe to sum up and wrap up the episode, can you define maybe what is important for people to have an ability to extend their expertise in being T-shaped experts? Like what you suggest them to learn or do to become more effective and be a T-shaped expert?
Yeah, it's a really, really good point to end on, I think. I would say two things. I mean, again, within my sort of discipline of banking and fintech, I think let's focus on that. Very much encourage most people that work in the industry still working quite incumbent firms. I don't necessarily want to all encourage them to leave those incumbent firms, but actually go and understand how the product is being built outside of the firm. And learn what it is that it involves. And that includes maybe just getting involved in design, getting involved in engineering, definitely getting involved now in the data science that sits behind that. And if you're building a fintech, understanding that the domains exist inside the banks and have done for a long time, and there's a reason that they make money. It's not necessarily a good reason, and you can actually steal a lot of that customer surplus back and give it back to the customer if you build a better version of the business model, but understand where that value is being created. And look, here in the UK, it's a fantastic market. It's a large European market, largest retail banking revenue pool in the world. There's lots of customer surplus that we can give, that we can create by really innovating the business model. So I think leaning, either if you're on the domain side or you're a tech builder yourself, make sure that you're actually thinking the other dimensions. And then I think generally it's embracing really the underlying managerial discipline of what it is to scale agile. And I don't mean just the understanding what it is that a Scrum does or what a Kanban does. I think actually this idea of working together in interdisciplinary teams. If you're not working in an interdisciplinary team, figure out a way how to.
Learn how to work with people.
Learn how to work with people not in your discipline. If you're stuck in a silo and you're working in a financial control department of a bank, figure out how you get on a project which allows you to work with the techs and the designers.
So maybe translate a little bit, like learn how to talk with the people who are working in different culture.
Yes.
Right? Being an engineer, it's really easy to talk with other engineers. I build this service. How do I build or use your service? But maybe T-shape as an ability to approach another department, which is sitting, I don't know, with the customer support or with the product or accounting, and say, okay, what we can do better together as a team. Let me listen to you and understand how I can help you with this deep understanding of the technology and learn or educate me what you're up to. So yeah, it's really good.
Yes,
Thank you so
absolutely.
much. It was a pleasant conversation. I think our listeners will learn a lot from this and they will be inspired to go and learn new skills.
Thanks, Igor. Really, really appreciate the time.
Thank you so much for being here today. And I think that's not the last episode. We will do much more. So always warm welcome to come back to our Fintech Garden podcast.
I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.